Why do thresholds matter? So today we're going to talk about what thresholds are, why you should know what yours are, and why they matter to your health and performance. So we're going to do a little chalk talk today, just so I can walk you through all the different pieces of this puzzle, because this can get a little confusing. So in a graded exercise test, or an exercise test where you're in the peak lab and we are measuring a bunch of different variables, all based on your oxygen consumption and the carbon dioxide that you're blowing off as a result of exercise intensity. What we're doing is taking you through a step-by-step increase in your intensity. Right? So on our graph here, we have intensity, right, on our y-axis that's going up and down here, marked by our black line that steps up every minute on this example. We have time, right, on our x-axis, and we have heart rate in red that's increasing, as you can see, with the increased work rate of the exercise test that we're monitoring. When we're looking for our variables to change as exercise intensity increases in our graded test, we're really looking to see how the body switches energy sources or fuel sources. So we can look at this a number of different ways. We can look at the metabolic or fuel source effect and change, which is using fat versus carbohydrate, or those two in conjunction. We can look at what happens to your respiration. So breathing rate changes, minute ventilation, or how much air we're moving per minute. We can look at heart rate, obviously. We can look at our VO2 increasing, which you know about based on the VO2 max video that you already watched. We want to look at how our body utilizes different batteries, or different engines, we'll call them. So if we're using a car as a reference, think about our bodies being a car, but our car isn't really adaptable. We are adaptable to the exercise that we give it. But the way that we operate is that we have a couple different types of cars built in, or a couple different engines, we could say. So if we want to produce a lot of work very rapidly, we can do that, but it costs our body a lot. We burn fuel very quickly, right? And that's our example of like a drag strip car, right? It can go really fast, couple hundred miles an hour, but it's only going to last somewhere in the ballpark of like 8 to 10 seconds. We have a performance car, right? It's a sports car that can drive fast around the track. It can drive fast on the road. It can perform at a high level, but it can still operate in normal road conditions, and you can use it as your daily driver. We also have our really efficient motor that can produce lower levels of force or work or output, but it has great endurance capability. It can last a really long time as long as we don't over rev that engine. Okay, so when we're looking for thresholds, what we're talking about is, when does our body go from one energy system or one engine and flip or turn on the next one? And it happens, relatively gradually, and then all of a sudden you're over your threshold and your body has to figure out a way to produce work, and it has to use an additional engine to create that. So we're going to start with the bottom below our what's called our AT1 or our VT1 or our LT1 if we were measuring lactate. So we're going to look at what kind of fuel source we're using when we're at low intensity. So as this graded exercise test begins, we have in blue here fat measured in the calories per minute that we're utilizing fat as fuel. So as you can see, as this exercise test starts, we are relying predominantly on fat versus, in the green, carbohydrate as our fuel source. Fat is predominant in all of our bodies versus carbohydrate. Even the leanest athletic population individual is still going to have endless calories or fuel from fat stored on their body. So we can use it very efficiently at low intensities. We should be able to, and we're starting out our graded test on that. So we're using that engine, right? As we increase intensity in our first couple minutes here, we see our fat utilization increase. We're relying more on that engine, right? That engine that lasts a long time, very fuel efficient. At the peak of this fat utilization, we call that your fat max. That is a marker in our graded exercise test. We see our carbohydrates start to kick in. So our bodies starting to need a little more fuel, a little faster burning fuel to produce a work rate or speed or wattage if we're on a bike that's significantly higher than when we started our test. Now, as we increase and we continue to move right in our test, our fat utilization is going to start to go down. And as our fat utilization goes down, we need to fuel our body somehow, and our carbs start to tick up. Our carbs are burned faster. We don't have endless supply on our body, but they are much more quicker burning, quicker reacting if we use that engine. This is that performance car that we're talking about now. So we're getting away from efficiency and we're starting to get that performance car selection. We see at a certain point, these two cross over. Okay. So at that crossover point, that's the top of your zone 2 if you're in a 5-zone model. And that is like kind of the marker of where our aerobic endurance should end with our stimulus for training. What we want to do is live down here under our first threshold. And that threshold again is our AT1 or our VT1 or LT1, depending upon what we're measuring. In this area, we're utilizing 2 fuel sources. We get great aerobic adaptation for endurance. Lots of great stuff happens there. The problem is most of us like to feel good when we work out. And when I say feel good, usually I mean feel accomplished, right? We like to do exercise intensity that gives us a really good sweat. I'm huffing and puffing when I'm doing my run or my interval or my group training class, and I feel good when it's done. I know I accomplished something. Usually to feel that way, we need to be on the right side of this crossover point. So if we continue to train consistently to the right of this crossover point and we don't do any work down here, we are not developing the bottom of this aerobic base big pyramid. We're not building the foundation. We've missed that. So we might be able to produce this kind of work, but the problem is it's costing our body a lot. We're not training efficiency. We're totally bypassing that motor that we talked about that is really good fuel consumption, really good economy. All right. So we're missing that. So below our AT1 or LT1 or our VT1, right, our first threshold is where we want to spend time with a bunch of our aerobic activity. And for most people, unless you're a very specific population, we should be spending somewhere in the like 70 to 80% of our work should be done here. And then we move to the right after that first threshold. And now we're in a zone that we could call zone 3. We can call that a tempo run or a tempo or sub-threshold biking interval or steady state blocks that are there that live in this area. And in this area, we're looking again at what's going on from a metabolic function standpoint or fuel sourcing. We're starting to rely less and less on fat. We're starting to rely much more on carbohydrate. And our body requires more oxygen. We're increasing our respiratory rate, and our body's looking to produce more force. So this is where we're operating that sports car. Now, as we continue to go to the right on this graph and this exercise test gets harder and harder, what we're seeing is that we're predominantly going to carbohydrate, and we've kind of dropped fat completely as a fuel source. So if we're doing short bouts of activity, totally fine. If our goal is to get adaptations that happen up here, great. But know that we are no longer utilizing this fat as a fuel source. So it's not helping us from an endurance perspective. That's fine, just a different concept. So at a certain point here, we're going to hit our next threshold, and that next threshold can be called LT2 if we're measuring lactate. It can be called VT2 if we're looking at respiratory function, or it can be called your AT2. Right? And that threshold is where our body is trying to manage the big ask that we have for it. We need a lot of work being produced, which gives off an acidic environment, right? We're producing these hydrogen ions that makes our muscles burn. We used to call it the lactic acid burn, right? We know that that's not the limitation of exercise intensity, but we are producing lactate. Lactate can be utilized as your fuel source, again, if you're efficient and you train here. So sub-second threshold training is very targeted towards tolerating that acidic environment and being able to handle very high levels of aerobic exercise. Think of this as 30 to 45, maybe even 60 minutes at somebody really elite of intensity at like a race pace. So if you're going as hard as you can for that 30 to 60 minute time frame, you're like right at or just sub the threshold. You're able to handle it. You're able to buffer that acid. Your body's able to reutilize that lactate. And that's another fuel source that we can add in. That's what training sub second threshold will do. Now, if we have no idea where that is, and we have no idea where this crossover point or your first threshold is, it is very hard to target what are arguably the two most important places to train to change our physiology. So if I miss the boat here and I'm either way too low or I'm above this crossover point, I'm getting the wrong adaptation in my exercise. I might be sweating, I might be burning calories, but I'm really missing on a critical point of building this foundation that helps me optimize my aerobic fitness. Now, the higher this crossover point is, or I should say the further to the right on this graph, the easier things get for me to be able to handle for a long time when it comes to the work that's demanded of me in the setting I'm in with aerobic activity. For high intensity recovery, this is a big key. Even if you're involved in a high intensity sport that's anaerobic in nature, short high intensity bouts, your aerobic system, again, trained down here, gives you the ability to drop your heart rate quickly between those high intensity bouts. So if we are missing this training and we're solely focused on things over here, you might be great for the first quarter, but then you're just going to completely fall off the mat because you don't have the ability to aerobically recover. Our second threshold number, what we do when we do our testing here in our lab is we give you zones. So when you're done your test, you understand exactly where this point is, right? And we go up and we correlate that to both this measurable of work that's been done, and this could be running pace. Let's say that's a 730 mile, or if we're in a bike test, right? This could be a 200 watt output on a bike. And what we do is look at that heart rate, and that's going to be the top of your zone 2 or your threshold. And let's just give that a number. Let's say that's 135. So now you know when you're out for your run or your bike or your elliptical that if you go over that 135, you are no longer getting the adaptations that happen right here. We're going to do that again for your next threshold. You're going to have this. This is the top end of your zone 4, right? If we're in our 5-zone model, we've got our heart rate here. Let's just say that's 165, and we're going to give that a pace. Let's say that's a 630 pace running or a 315 watt bike threshold. Now we have numbers. Now we can figure out objective feedback in our workouts to identify interval training targets, right? To handle that acidic environment, to prevent fatigue, and we can handle our aerobic prescription with accuracy now. So thresholds are critical for optimal health, trying to move these two numbers to the right on this graph so we can do a lot more work with a lot less cost to our body. And they are incredibly important for competitive sports, whether that's team sports on the field, basketball court, hockey, or exercising, training for an individual sport, endurance sport like running, cycling, mountain biking, something like that. So the value that you get with these threshold numbers is going to be able to give you a bigger return on your investment in your training. And who doesn't want that? So if you're interested in getting this data to define your zones, your training, or would like a program specific to these numbers for your needs that are different than everybody you work out with, come see us at the Peak Lab. We'll take you through your graded exercise test and be able to give you the information you need to optimize your fitness.